Peace and light, that old guy Australia on YouTube and Instagram. This is the last video I'm going to do regarding the election, or even mentioning it. And there's a few things I'm going to say, and there'll be things that I'll think about when I get home and think, oh, I should have said that, could have said that, should have said that, didn't say that. But that's what I like to do, off the cuff, straight as it is. You know? Like, subscribe, share. And let's get right down into it, okay? Now, I've watched plenty of videos, as I've said before, from Joel Jamal or Senator Roberts, Malcolm Roberts, or, Lily and heaps of others, Millie. And the general consensus, particularly if you were watching Joel's that I got sent, was that at worst, the election was sloppy, ill-prepared, ill-conceived and sloppy. Now, they also intimate, in their opinion, that there's very little evidence of corruption within the federal election we just had here in Australia. So I want to address that, because Joel Jamal probably knows a hell of a lot more about politics than I do, as does Senator Malcolm Roberts. And the good thing about democracy, which we don't have, but in my own head, is I can have an opinion. If you don't agree with it, that's entirely up to you. It's not really an issue. But I don't actually agree with them. I don't agree with Joel Jamal's opinion, and I most certainly don't agree with Malcolm Roberts' position at all. So, why is that, Owen? Well, let me tell you. I've covered most of this before. But let me explain it to you this way. When a government sets out to have an election, they pick a date. Now, that date isn't numbers in a hat and they pull it out and go, oh, April 12th, look at that. It's not like that. To set an election date could take months, and months of careful planning. The date is always selected. It's not just a random date. It has a purpose and a meaning as to why it's put on that particular day. Now, their spin doctors are involved. There's party room debates about it. They talk about it. They look at what's going on around Australia on those particular days, weekends, months, and they carefully choose and select a date to have the election. It is not a random date, right? It's not Tinder. So, that's the first thing you need to know. The second thing you need to know is this. When they decide to have a date, they don't, as a couple of the AEC, or Australian Electoral Commission officers said, pull out some old ballot papers from somewhere and there's blank spots because, we used these from last time. No, not true. They have to design the ballot paper. That involves people. And they get all the information they have, the Australian Electoral Commission, and within there, in their bloated bureaucracy, they set out the ballot paper. Now, if you think that ballot paper is a random selection, or maybe they draw marbles to see who goes where, again, that's not true. Tremendous amount of input from both parties, from various major parties like the Greens, Labor, Liberal, Nationals, as to what's going on that ballot paper. It's not random. It's not just some kind of democratic process that goes on to put those names in certain positions. It's not a bloody horse race. You don't say, Joel Jamal, or that's not Joel, but let's say, Scott Morrison's drawn barrier 14. It's not a bloody horse race. All right? That's what you need to know. So that ballot paper is carefully set out. And once they agree on how it's set out, then it goes to the printers. And it has to be printed. Right? Now, we had boxes in there that were vacant. They had no name next to them. Every person who was applied to run as a candidate for the Senate had their party name or their name next to a box where you could put a number in it. Right? And you were told that above the line you had to vote 1 to 6. That in itself is a lie. You only had to put 1. By putting 1 to 6, they guaranteed that the preferences then followed down to the major parties. You only had to put 1. In the AEC handbook, it clearly states that a person who only puts 1 number above the line, the vote is still valid. It's a valid vote. It's a valid vote. That's something you need to understand. Now, when they printed these ballot papers off, and we had spare boxes, like with Morgan Jonas down in Victoria, he had no name. So when people went to vote for him, they couldn't find him. He wasn't up there above the line. He wasn't there was a box, which was his, but he didn't have his name next to it. And if you think that was some kind of editing mistake, whoops, an oversight, then you really need your head read. That was carefully construed, engineered that way. So that in itself is another piece of fraud. No more corruption in this election. Right? How did you vote? Did you speak to the Australian Electoral Commission officers who were present? Did you see that they rang the Australian Electoral Commission and they asked about those blank boxes, and they were told in no uncertain terms that if they put a vote or a number in that box, it could be construed as an invalid vote because there's no party or name there. They were told that, there's a blank box because somebody has withdrawn from the election and we'd already printed them off. No, because if you printed them off, their name would be there. We had many, many, many reports of AEC officers around the country and voting poll officers telling people not to put a number in those boxes that were blank because they would probably be an invalid vote. Now, this is not random. These people were instructed. It wasn't just shoddy. They didn't make this shit up themselves. They were instructed to carry out those instructions and instruct people. Right? They rang them, the actual AEC office, and they were saying that from the AEC office. Now, if every bloody AEC officer who was spoken to had the same bloody story, then there's a conspiracy there. There was a deliberate engineering of that information to do with how the ballot paper was construed, edited, and then printed. This is corruption right through. It is not sloppy. It is very carefully constructed and engineered to produce a result. And the result was to make sure that the freedom parties that they knew would get major votes didn't. Right? Lastly, what did you vote with? Did you cut your wrists and get a bit of blood? No? Did you use a biro, which can't be tampered with? No? You used a pencil. A pencil. Oh, really? So now we're voting with pencils. How can you not see this? So here's the last bit for you. 3 days out from the election, the major parties get an email. It's sent out from the AEC. And all the little independents, they get one too. And guess what it says? It says that they're going to utilise a 1998 piece of legislation that was inserted, I think, in the AEC Act 614. I'm not sure. Back in 1998, this was inserted. And they were going to utilise it at this election, which would enable all postal votes to be opened by AEC officers without scrutineers. Oh, surely. You know how many postal votes there were? Bucket loads. So they enacted a piece of legislation from 1998 that allowed them to open those postal votes without scrutineers being present. 3 days out. They were left it as long as they could before they released that email to the people to say, whoops, by the way, here's what's happening. We had scrutineers in Western Australia where there were no mask mandates for those people, which weren't allowed into offices where they were counting ballots because they didn't have masks on. There was so much corruption going on around this. It's ludicrous. We had the Labor Party in Australia, because we've got two-party preferred if you're watching from overseas. We have two major parties who are like the ants pants. In 1951, 98% of people voted in Australia. Now it's around about 65%, and we get fined if we don't vote. It's not a democratic right. You are fined if you don't vote. You are sent a fine if you do not vote. Now, do you know why they introduced that? Because people didn't want to vote. They're sick of the major parties. They don't trust the major parties. They do not want to vote for them, so we're being forced to vote. If you don't, you get fined. And yet still, 68% of people vote. This election, the Labor Party, who is now the ruling government party of Australia, got the lowest vote in its heckin' history since the Labor Party formed. This is the lowest vote they have ever received at a federal election. The lowest vote. They were lower than the Coalition, the other major party. 4% lower. But they got over the line due to preferences. They got the majority vote. They didn't get majority seats, though they did, but all through preferences. They did not. If you want to put it this way, let me put it this way. Australia voted Labor out. Australia voted the Coalition out. They voted them out. But they got in by using preferences in illicit ways. That's how they got in. When everybody votes you out with the lowest vote you've ever had, how can you be the ruling, governing party in that country? Two-party preferred, the most corrupt system ever. It has to go. And until it goes, we can never, ever win an election. All the freedom parties were going to be great. They were going to do this, they were going to do that. It was chaotic. It never happened. Yes, we've got a change in the Senate, and there's going to be difficulty with government ramming through legislation, because I'll have to talk to independents and various small parties. But the preferences were not given to the parties they should have gone to. They weren't. People did not want their preferences to go to Labor if they voted for UAP. They did not want their votes to go to Liberal if they voted for, One Nation. They did not want their votes to go to the major parties. They would have preferred anybody else first. But that's not what the Election Commission did. That's not how they ran this election. It was corrupt, and it was rigged, and it was engineered. So we didn't get a party that we wanted. We voted out the party that's in. A socialist green party. We voted them out. And now they're ruling us. It was on the Saturday. On the Sunday they declared it, and the Monday Albanese flew out as Prime Minister of Australia. The biggest clown is like the Australian version of Joe Biden. Absolute klutz. Took with him his socialist green offsider, who the Chinese call the most arrogant person they've ever met, Penny Wong. That's what I've got to say about the election. I disagree with those people who said it wasn't rigged, that it wasn't corrupt, that it was all above board, but it was sloppy. No, it was carefully designed, carefully engineered, carefully structured, and carried out to get the result that they were after. It didn't matter who got in. Two wings, one bird, same bird. That old guy Australia, no more election shit. We're going to move on. Peace and light. In the end, we're going to win this damn thing. Just remember that. We will always win in the end, because light will always triumph over darkness.